And let me start off by thanking you all for showing up at 5 p.m. I was convinced that we were going to have 2 people in the audience today, so I'm really excited that we're going to have this conversation together. I've got 3 fantastic human beings who have been speaking all day and are hoping to contribute new ideas to this session. We're going to have more of a discussion, actually, less of a presentation, and I'm hoping that you will queue up those questions, being the journalists that you are, queue up those questions for a Q&A later on. So I'm going to start with you, Jane. If you could just give us a quick introduction about yourself, and then I'm going to go down the line and we will kick off.
Right. Yep,
Yeah.
great. Well, hi, my name is Jane. I'm a freelance reporter and I focus on online investigations. And I'm really excited about this session. I began working with online investigations in 2016 as a disinformation reporter at BuzzFeed News. Because Donald Trump was elected. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I've been using online investigations and online investigative approaches to contribute to investigations surrounding the war. And I can pretty much tell you anything about Telegram. So we're going to talk a lot about some of the different social media networks that we use, and Telegram, which I call Eastern Europe's Twitter, is really where I live. So we'll have a tip sheet for you about that later, but that's a little bit about where I'm coming from when it comes to investigating social media and using social media for investigations.
Thank you. Luis?
Okay, well, I'm Luis Azardo. I'm a Guatemalan journalist. I come from the computer science field, and then I became journalist. I have been covering disinformation, hate speech, and radicalization for more than 13 years. I started in Guatemala doing content moderation, and then I started to realize that there was some specific behavior that was not kind of shady. So I started to collect information, and finally in 2018, I published the first a large investigation about what was happening in Guatemala. And then a lot of people realized that all over the world, and specifically in Central America and Latin America, were happening similar situations. So we started to doing networking, and we founded Confirmado, and we started working specifically to fight disinformation.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Pri. I'm a researcher at the Dow Center at Columbia University, and I guess my title is technically a computational fellow because nobody else uses computers in the building. But it's effectively trying to use computational techniques to do digital investigations. And I think the reason I'm over here right now is literally because in 2019, I had done a big study on WhatsApp in the context of the Indian elections, and joined over 1,000 groups and tried to kind of understand what was going on in the Indian landscape then. And I think like that was an experiment in like what works, what doesn't work, and like the signal to noise ratio is really high. So in the presence of that, how can you just like focus on what's important and ignore the rest?
Thank you so much. So I thought I'd start off by asking all of you to just talk a little bit about how critical social media investigations are to journalism generally. Does everyone here have to be a computational scientist now? Anyone?
Well, I don't know how to code, so I hope not. I mean, look, I think that everybody in this room understands that social media has an impact on day-to-day life. And whether that's hate campaigns that begin on social media and begin to take place in the real world, or whether that's manipulation of public opinion, or whether that's simply using social media to enhance an investigation that you're doing, it is an essential tool for reporters because there's simply not one beat where social media does not contribute something to it. And so I think one of the goals for reporters should be to think through how can they enhance their traditional reporting with online investigative techniques and with social media techniques. That can be something as simple as learning how to do advanced search really well. That can be something as simple as building out spreadsheets that collect information in a way that's quite practical, and then you're able to see, changes or evidence over time. That can mean using social media to find sources who you might not have otherwise found. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a fully code-driven, code-first approach. It can be something that a person incorporates or a reporter incorporates in their beat little by little. And social media can allow you to tell stories that otherwise would be inaccessible. So one of the ways in which I've used social media for the last year and a half is I've gotten very creative at finding communities that, particularly on occupied territories in Ukraine right now, where sources may be willing to either speak to reporters, explain what's going on, or sometimes, although not as much anymore, but at the beginning of the war, pass on photo or video evidence of what was taking place on occupied territory. That is not something that I would be able to do as a reporter because I cannot enter the occupied territory. I cannot find sources there. But that is just, one of the ways in which we can very practically gain access to communities that we may not have otherwise had access to. And there's nothing particularly complicated about that. It's essentially thinking through the audiences that you're targeting or where your potential sources may be, and figuring out different ways to find those audiences.
So it's a new way of kind of finding sources and finding people to collaborate with. How do you work around verifying that information that you're getting through social media sources, if I may ask?
I'm not getting around it. I'm going straight through it. The verification question, I think, is actually really interesting and really important. And the reason for that is we've seen a huge growth in the ability to geolocate images and videos, to find images and videos, and a huge growth of image and video-based content online overall, particularly with more image-based social media networks. And with that, we've seen a lot of experts who are not quite experts, and who will say that something is verified when it is not. And that is the other side of the coin when it comes to reporters learning the set of skills in digital verification, which is whether it's basic geolocation, whether it's working with satellite companies, whether it's knowing the right experts to call. We need to be able to verify a lot of the stuff that we find online ourselves in a way that's practical and quick, so that we're not necessarily relying on the work of others that may not always be as accurate as we hope.
Anyone else?
I think I will start with the first question. I think social media, specifically doing these kind of investigations, allows us to portray and to specifically understand specific behaviors that are very, very well known all over the internet. Because it's not the same that we see a specific behavior in a troll or an account in social media, that investigating and understanding the pattern and how it is related to other networks all over the internet. So this is the first thing, and the other thing is we need to consider that there is a lot of investigations for the last years, but most of those investigations are focusing on, I would say, larger countries, because of course larger populations, but there is, from my point of view, some bias on that part, because there are a lot of small countries that are under-researched, and we don't know what is happening over there. And I come specifically from one of those countries, and it's really complicated to do this kind of research. So for me, it's really important to be here and to raise the voice on that.
And to also, collaborate with people who have those kinds of access and tools.
Yes, I mean, if you don't do networking, it's impossible to do this kind of job.
Perfect. Pri?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that Jane had said, where it's like you don't need to learn to code. I think what happens is that people get a little bit overwhelmed and intimidated when they think that we're using digital techniques and, oh God, I need to, and it's just like, no. I spend more of my time clicking around on things and trying to find links between things manually. And those, more often than not, are significantly more helpful and they inform the coding part of it. So if you're adept enough at being able to find linkages or find people or find sources or content or whatever you're looking for, I think coding is secondary. At the end of the day, it's being able to, like scope out what you're actually interested in, what you're looking for, and then kind of try to strategically think through how and where you can find it.
Yeah, and I think a big message from this conference is that collaborative work is really crucial. So if you're not a coder, you can collaborate with a coder to get that piece of research done. I wonder if you could talk a little bit, I think particularly you, Jane, in terms of your work on the Ukraine war, well, the Russian war in Ukraine. It's not the Ukraine war. In terms of what you're seeing on social media and how that filters through to reporting on the war.
Yeah, so at the end of this, you'll have a little tip sheet that I compiled with you in terms of working on Telegram. But one thing that I really want to stress is that none of the social media networks are siloed, and we cannot treat them as if they are siloed. So what that means on a practical level is that any person that you're looking to speak with is not only going to be on Facebook. They're not only going to be on Twitter. They're not only going to be on Telegram. And you can use that to be able to find sources and to be able to find communities. So one example is at the end of last year, I contributed to a story that looked at the missing people in Mariupol. And we were hoping to find people from Mariupol, but even more importantly, we wanted to find people in Mariupol who maybe have a missing loved one who would be able to speak with us. And the way I went about that practically is there are a lot of Facebook groups and some Telegram groups, but mostly Facebook groups, where relatives post images of people who are missing asking for help. When I went to those groups, already you sort of have a set of people who are probably willing to speak with you, although trauma-informed reporting is a whole other thing that we should be aware of with sources like that. And you have phone numbers and contact information for them. But you can take it a step further, which is that I understand that in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, Telegram is an incredibly important social media platform. And I was curious whether there were any Telegram groups or Telegram channels that I was missing that I didn't find that maybe were being shared in those Facebook groups. And you can either search Facebook groups by entering just the word Telegram in case somebody's just sharing Telegram accounts, or entering the short URL for Telegram, which is t.me. And once you begin searching Facebook groups for that, you essentially start seeing all the messages where people are pointing each other to all these different Telegram groups that might be useful. Using that method, I found a list of Telegram groups in Mariupol that go by neighborhood. So essentially, you're able to see the exchanges, the text messages that people were sending before the communication was cut off when they were in a specific neighborhood. So you were essentially able to get a picture of what was going on during the siege on the ground until the communication got cut off in March of last year. And through that, I was able to find a woman who was in Mariupol who was looking for her husband, who actually filmed from Mariupol while she was under occupation, the place where he disappeared. She filmed what happened to their apartment, and she filmed her story. And we were able to contrast that with the story of somebody who had left Mariupol. And that is a way to tell a story that is very human and is very painful. But it's also a way to do exactly what I'm sort of trying to get at here, which is you can use these practical and fairly simple or fairly straightforward ways to find sources. But you need to be creative in thinking about where your sources may be. So you can repeat that search, for example, for Telegram on Twitter and get a completely different set of Telegram groups. And the reason why you're going to get a completely different set of Telegram groups is because on Twitter, mostly you're going to get either wartime watchers who will post photos or videos, or you will get Russian propaganda who are enticing people to come to these Telegram groups. And so there's really nothing complicated about the way that I had found this woman or the way I had found other families that we spoke with. But it was something that I would not have been able to do had I not understood some of the basic search techniques of online investigations and how information flows across the web.
So many of us here, though, are, not social media natives, if I could put it gently. Does this mean that we are having to learn how to use all of these social media platforms as they come about? Or are there a set of principles that we could apply to the kind of work that you're doing? Luis, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we need to understand first what we are researching or investigating, and then we are going to set a methodology. Once we set a methodology, we will understand also which kind of tools we need to use. And this is, for me, the most important thing, choosing the specific tools that you need to use. Otherwise, you will be having a lecture of the situation that is not completely true, or it's kind of not the best approach of the information. So from my point of view, I think tools are the most important thing that you can use, but you need to choose wisely.
Perfect. Pri, you were saying earlier in another session that it's difficult to keep up with the ways of getting data from these different social media platforms, and that you wish there was one kind of principle or way of gathering the data. How do you deal with that in your work on a daily basis?
Keep trying to get creative. No, it's I think after 2016, a lot of platforms put together some transparency measures in place, be it ad libraries, be it APIs, be it CrowdTangle. And then in the last 6 to 9 months, we've seen all of that get completely decimated. And so right now, it's like, if I want to find out what's going on Twitter and I don't want to pay Twitter $42,000 a month or whatever it is, how can I do it? And I don't want to pay Twitter $42,000 a month. So I think at that point, and then Facebook has an anti-scraping team. So it's like, okay, if you've got an anti-scraping team, how do I still actively, try to monitor the platform in order to see what's going on at a relatively larger scale? And I think at every single point, it's like, okay, we can use CrowdTangle while it still exists, but these things are getting harder. And I think say I've written a scraper 2 months back, the entire thing's broken and I have to go back and fix it and dedicate time to fix that. And that's an ongoing effort that isn't going to stop. And I don't see a magic bullet solution to that, sadly.
That's quite depressing to think about, actually.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I just want to ask a last question before. Luis, do you want to add?
I think we as journalists usually want things quick and easy, because we have deadlines, we have to explain a lot of things to a lot of people in a small period of time. But the problem with this is if you don't understand what you are investigating, you will give a false claim or something that is not completely true. And on the other hand, this is how I explain it usually to local journalists in rural areas in my country. You either have a lot of money to pay for really expensive tools, or you learn to code. And both things are really complicated for journalists because of time or money. So we are trapped in a position where there is a lot of people trying to investigate, but doesn't have access to tools, resources, training, whatever.
Absolutely.
I will just add one thing that, which is that journalists move fast, but academics have the luxury of moving slow. And that is where the best partnerships when it comes to investigating social media come from. Academics have the ability to take their time to develop tools. One really great team is at McGill University, and they're developing this observatory that scrapes Telegram channels and scrapes Instagram as well, to sort of show these networks of communication between accounts. And so what your newsroom may be lacking, academics may be able to help with, because one of the things that we've seen over the last 5-10 years is a big growth and a big investment from academic institutions in studying social media. And very frequently, academics will be more than happy to do a very quick, look at data that you need, or a quick introduction to tools that they're using, in order to be able to inform your investigations. So yes, definitely, the code versus paid tools is a difficult dilemma, but I think it's really important for journalists to remember that journalists are not the only ones working on this problem. And a lot of other people are. And so if you're a newsroom that doesn't have a data team, if you're a newsroom that doesn't have resources, turning to academics or other professionals in the field can be a really great way to collaborate on online investigations without, investing thousands of dollars that your newsroom doesn't have.
Oh, sorry, I don't know why I'm asking for that. I've got this. So that's a lovely segue into my final question before I open it up to everyone, and that's about the ethics of social media investigations. And Priya, I'm going to start with you because you spoke about your research on WhatsApp. So tell us about what it is you had to confront ethically in terms of doing that research.
So WhatsApp is it's a fascinating environment to investigate for a multitude of reasons. But I think grappling with the ethical concerns there were high because due to its end-to-end encrypted nature and due to a lot of the advertisement that WhatsApp does is around privacy, anybody using WhatsApp should have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And as an academic or a journalist, I can't violate that. So, even kind of contemplating that is a complete non-starter. Over and above that, there's also, the groups, some of the groups, so at that point, this has changed since, but WhatsApp kept its number of members in a group to 256. So it's okay, at what point can I join a group without me feeling like I'm intruding on a private conversation? And this was just kind of literally a finger in the air. If it's 50 or more people, it's probably fine to join a group. And if it's not, then, I'm not going to join the group, even if the name of the group indicates it's a highly political, highly partisan group. And I think those were the two main principles. And then you kind of get into a whole other world of pain and kind of, genuine, okay, how do I actually want to think about this around when you're pulling the data into, a database or wherever you're analyzing the data? Because WhatsApp has phone numbers. And these phone numbers are obviously what, a PII or personally identifiable information. So it's we can't use that at all. And we can't even store that on the cloud or anything that's on the internet, because what if I'm hacked? Suddenly other people who've not. So the way we had done the WhatsApp thing was we had stated in the group that we are from the Tau Center and we were doing an investigative project. And if somebody kicked us out of a group, we respected that. But we also had to acknowledge the fact that we hadn't got explicit consent from every member in the group to monitor their activity. And then, so it's just kind of okay, so now I need to work on an air-gapped computer, which, for those of you who don't know, the computer that's not connected to the internet, just in case I get hacked or something like that. And then it's effectively the technical challenge of writing small scripts on my normal computer that's connected to the internet, doing proof of concepts there, and then moving everything over to the air-gapped computer. So just kind of the ethics and kind of the genuine fear of, exposing people for something they hadn't consented to kind of really drove a lot of that project.
I think one of the most difficult things that we need to decide sometimes is which kind of information we are going to release. Otherwise, we can end doxing someone, and even if it's part of an investigation, maybe that information is not necessarily or should be released. And on the other hand, maybe the techniques that we use or the tools that we use to scrape or to extract information from some platforms could be very invasive and in some occasions could be even illegal in some countries. So we need to be aware of we are. For example, in a previous panel, I mentioned an activity that we made, and it was supported by a judge. So I was allowed to hijack an account, a Twitter account. But that cannot be made here in Europe. I mean, there is no judge that would allow me to do that. But in some other countries, you can. So you need to be aware where you are and the legal requirements that you need to enforce when you are doing this kind of investigations.
Yes, definitely be, within the confines of the law. Talk to your newsroom lawyer if you have one in terms of what you're planning to do. And I think as reporters, even with any kind of investigation, we operate on a rule of no surprises, and that rule of no surprises extends to any online information that you publish. So if you're posting somebody's Twitter post or somebody's, if you're essentially what you said, right? What you're using in your investigation, what you're printing your investigation, the person who posted that or the person who created that content needs to be aware that that is what you're doing. Because you're essentially, if they're not already a public person, then you're making them a public person. The tricky part of it is, of course, there's posts that go viral and there's posts that are anonymous, and you sort of need to have those newsroom conversations in terms of how you're going to use them. But the expectation of privacy is certainly there, particularly with platforms like WhatsApp or closed Facebook groups. Facebook groups where there's maybe 200 members and they're closed down. And you can't misrepresent yourself, so it can get quite tricky, and it can get tricky in a way that reporters are not able to do something that certain researchers are able to do because of the requirements that we have in terms of the ethics.
Just a very quick answer to this question. You spend a lot of time online. Are you ever concerned?
No.
Are you ever concerned about your own digital footprint? Are you worried about it? Do you think about it? Do you think about what someone may do with it? Pri?
Yeah, I mean, I try to minimize my digital footprint as much as possible and try to ensure there's verified private information. But the problem is data brokers are everywhere and I have no control over my information that's out there.
In my case, I'm going to disclose right now that I have several personas created.
Good.
So when they want to track me back, they cannot because even my personal accounts, sometimes they are decoy of what I'm really doing.
Yeah.
So posting in different situations or pictures that I took 2 months ago, and saying that I am right now over there.
Yeah.
So this is because I work in cybersecurity, so I have to be really careful when I'm trying. For example, I was doing research and investigation specifically in Turkey, and the very next day I started receiving phishing attacks. And when I tracked back the links of the phishing attacks, it was coming from the government. So they were really aware that I was doing that investigation the very next day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a few different reasons to be aware of what you post online. One is that harassment campaigns against reporters, as we know, are getting more and more common and more brutal. And not only do they affect the reporters, if you're not careful with what you put online, they can affect your family members or your friends. And so being mindful of, first, the sort of information that you're disclosing on social media networks is incredibly important. Delete your tweets. Tweetdeleter.com is a fantastic tool for that. Lock down your Facebook account. In certain countries, you can actually close the account altogether. Otherwise, in the security settings, there's a limit past posts function that just completely closes down everything that you've posted previously. But also be aware of which messengers you use and which sources you speak to which messengers you're using to speak to those sources. Sorry, it's been a long day. And what I mean by that is we're all aware that, for example, messengers like Telegram and Viber are not particularly secure at all, even if you enable the encryption settings. But we also know that although the encryption on WhatsApp is pretty good, Facebook caves pretty quickly when somebody asks for metadata of conversations, which is who did you text at what time. They do have that information even if they don't have the messages themselves. Signal, of course, at this point is the golden standard of encryption when it comes to messengers, and we need to be able to, if we're protecting our sources, Signal is sort of the best way to go. But the other thing I'll add is there's a really great security clinic at this conference who will check your phones for spyware and will give you really great general advice. I think that most of them are from Citizen Lab. So go through those tools. Online security can feel a little bit tedious, and it is, but I promise you, once you're in the middle of a harassment campaign or an attack or a phishing campaign, you'll be really grateful that you went through those steps and that you've limited your own digital footprint to the best of your ability.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to take this mic away, and we have a runner. There we go. You can see she's running. And let's take a couple questions. I have someone in the front.
Thank you so much.
Can we take 3 questions and then we'll take another round? So woman in the front, so you'll go second, and then anyone else? All good? Let's go.
Can you elaborate on WhatsApp tools that you use? Because with Telegram you can locate even closed chats, but with WhatsApp it's, I guess, a little bit more difficult. And what Telegram techniques you use apart from GIJC23 that it's pretty well known? Thank you so much.
Let's do this one first. Let's do this question.
Good evening. Thank you for this important discussion. My question for Louis, you were talking about the methodology and using the right terminology, so not to get data or to have the appropriate data. Talking about Facebook and the algorithm and the bias of the algorithm, do you have any tips that we could use when we want to use certain terminology so we will not end up with the most relevant results for our profile? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pri, do you want to get started? And then we'll go to Liz.
Yeah, sure. So on WhatsApp, this is going to be a slightly long-winded answer, and I'm sorry for that. So when I was doing the project in 2019, it was around the Indian election, and what I was doing was I was using search techniques similar to what Jane had mentioned earlier, looking for public URLs to WhatsApp groups and joining them if they fit the criteria I was looking at. And so I would look up Twitter, Facebook, and Google to just kind of find any and all public WhatsApp URLs that I could. Then I would join the groups and effectively, and this is in a pre-web WhatsApp age, so a lot of this was hideously manual. So, everybody who says learn to code, no, I was doing everything manually. And once I did that, there was a tool called iPhone Backup Extractor, which basically let me back up the database on a daily basis and just export all the contents to a computer. And that I had kind of automated that bit. And the cool thing about the iPhone Backup Extractor is that it extracts the entire database of conversations, so you can just search that. But it also exports all the media and everything. So even if you want to group media and things together, it's easy to do. The landscape has changed a lot now in that web WhatsApp works pretty well, and public WhatsApp groups are less relevant than they used to be. So I want to kind of give 2 shout-outs to universities in the US who are working on WhatsApp. One is a new lab in Princeton called the Digital Witness Lab, and the way they're working is effectively they're working with people on the ground in order to try to find the relevant WhatsApp group to join, because otherwise the signal-to-noise ratio is just completely and utterly insane. And it's a similar thing with folks at Rutgers University, where, again, they're working with people on the ground and they're literally knocking door to door and asking people to donate their WhatsApp data in order to help facilitate research and journalism. And I think that this goes back to something that was previously said, where it's like the collaboration between people on the ground and academics really helps, push things forward.
Okay, in the case of terminology, there is no such a standards that I follow by everyone, but what we can do is start following specific researchers or journalists that cover those topics and also create our lists in the case of Twitter, for example, or start following specific websites that release information related to that. The one that is the most reference most of the time is First Draft. They have a lot of really useful information, and they have a lot of terminology that we can use. So yeah, this is, I think, the first step, and there's a lot more.
Just a quick note on terminology. One of the most important documents that came out over the last 5 years is the Berkeley Protocol. So the Berkeley Protocol was created at Berkeley University by online investigators, particularly human rights online investigators, who use online investigations in such a way that those cases can then be brought to court. So you're not going to find any tools in the Berkeley Protocol, but you will find approaches to investigations and very standard methodologies when it comes to investigating human rights abuses or putting together online investigations. They also have this really beautiful investigative cycle that lays out, I think, like 5 or 6 steps of an online investigation that you can follow. So I strongly recommend the Berkeley Protocol. It's also been translated in a few different languages. So that's just a really important document to have. And on the Telegram question, I have a tip sheet. I'm wondering if we can throw it up on the screen, the Telegram tip sheet. You guys are going to be able, it's just a PDF, so you're going to be able to download it. During this session. But what I did is first I showed you some just like very basic things of what Telegram functions are. Then I showed you some channel discovery tools, so on Google, on Twitter, and on Facebook, how it works and sort of what to search for. Where it says key terms, you don't need to put the square brackets, just put the terms that you need. And then if you could scroll down a little bit. So one thing is Telegram keeps metadata, which no other social media platform does. So if you download the desktop app, you're able to download the conversation of the entire channel or group, which is really useful. But every voice memo, every photo, and every video, the metadata on that is kept on Telegram. So if you wanted to check it, it's very easy. I like metadata to go, but use any metadata checker. And if you do know how to code, or if you do have coders in your newsroom, Telegram has a very robust API that you can tap into that is pretty open. I also gave you a tool called Telepathy. So it is a paid tool, but they work with journalists a lot. It's pretty closed access, so you have to reach out to them before you're able to use them. But that is a tool. It's sort of like a superpower tool that's built on top of the Telegram API. And then if we could scroll down a little bit more, I also gave you just a list of, keep going a little bit more. Yeah, a little bit up. All right, perfect. We did it. Again, you're going to be able to download all of this on this scheduling app, I think. But it's just a lot of third-party websites that you can use. And what they do, Teachistat is sort of the most popular one, and that's the one that everybody knows. It's really great because you can spider out your Telegram searches, so it shows all the Telegram channels that a single channel referenced, or the other way, channels that reference that Telegram channel. It'll make sense when you see it. And I gave you a bunch of other search engines as well that you can use to discover channels. So don't rely on all of these only. Use every single method that I gave in there, but that's sort of just like the quick out of the box, like get started with Telegram if you've never used Telegram before, third-party tools, and Telegram proper that you're gonna have access to. Again, it's just sorry that it's just a PDF, but hopefully it's a useful PDF.
It's great. Thank you so much. So we're going to pull up Luis's presentation also, so he can go through his tips. But I should add that, we've gotten much better at talking about method in investigations. So when you're seeing big investigations now, usually journalists and newsrooms are reflecting on how they got there. And I think that creates a community of practice for all of us actually to spend time on and getting those terminologies and methods in place for the work that we're doing. Luis?
Okay, maybe we can go to the second slide.
Next slide. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, here is just a little statement about investigating in social media, and I purposely put it high-level researchers, reachable data, training tools, and funding. This is the 5 things that you really need in order to do this kind of investigations. And this is the kind of things that usually smaller countries doesn't have. If we go to the next one, please. Okay, so what happens if we doesn't have that amount of resources or funding or high-level researchers? We can do this. First, networking, as fact-checkers did many years ago. They started to gather together and work together to fight and to do fact-checking, use crowdfunding. When I was telling you about the high-level tools that are really expensive, what we have done in some countries is that we create a group of people that are interested in a specific tool, and we do crowdfunding. We pay the license for 1 year, for example, and we distribute the access among the local journalists that want the access. So you don't actually have to pay it by your own, so you can create a group of people that are interested in using and, of course, support each other. And, of course, raise the voice about the lack of opportunities in places like this or any other place, because the under-researched countries have a lot of problems that are not visible to the rest of the world. And the last one, please. And I always try to remember everyone about digital security. As I mentioned before, create personas and use the layers of security, what I call layers of security. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, use encrypted platforms that can be anonymous, encrypted data, and watch our communications.
Thanks, Luis.